Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the Belmont Saga, Part 1, Chapter 19, An Unusual Errand. So last week, we took a step back from a raging battle in space to have a deeper dive into the life and history of Lord Errand. Who he is, how he came to be, his life growing up in Calvert, how his family has always had a checkered past with the sisters, and how that affected Errand, how he always wanted to impress them. And everyone in the league wants to impress the sisters, and in a small way, Errand wanted to too. He's not rich and powerful, he's not going to dazzle them with money, frondage, or anything, or programmability, because he's untouchable. They're not going to program with him. No. And that bothered him a lot throughout his life. He always wanted to impress the sisters. He wrote a little poem about the wonders of summertime, and he was selected to read it to the sisters, and he couldn't do it. He was just too nervous, too afraid to do so. And he always thought he missed something, that perhaps they would have enjoyed his poem. And we see how he was too seasick to delve into the family trade of fishing, and he always stayed on the docks with his mother and his sisters. How he found a destroyed Merc 22, just a toy, basically a moped of flying machines, very small, that doesn't go very high or fast, but he figured out what was wrong with it and fixed it. He found his brother, his meathead of a brother, messed it up, and now he was going to fix it, and he did, taught himself how to fly, and then he wanted to join the fleet and become a helmsman, but unfortunately, as Lord Gerald Catherbaum had to tell him, since his family is untouchable, this fleet will never admit him as a helmsman or anything else. That's how unfair the fleet can be, how unfair the League can be. The League is a very good society, but it's not perfect. And this is the general desire to get in good with the sisters, and if the sisters feel a certain way about you, then that's pretty much it for you. And regardless of what skills or merit you have, and that's just the way life is, I guess, fair or unfair. But Lord Catherbaum, being a good man, a staunch advocate of Calvert's, said, who are the sisters to judge you? They don't know you. You're your own person. You're not your uncles who the sisters got pissed off with. You're you, and they should respect you as best they can. And he got him into a writing contest, and if he won the writing contest, he would be given basically a summer job at the fleet in the mail room, and that's where he ended up, and that's where he stayed for a long time, but eventually getting out of the mailroom and becoming Admiral Derlith's adjutant, which has its pros and cons. But as we'll see, even though the Admiral is full of bluster and he can be unpleasant, he's still a generous benefactor. He's still a conscientious boss. And Errand proved his worth, and even though the Admiral's always yelling at him and whatnot, the Admiral still cares for Errand and is a good boss. You'll see in this coming chapter right here. And again, as I mentioned last week, we saw earlier that Lady Lily, the Nargle spirit made of sand, likes Errand a lot, even though she has never met him, and says she knows his heart and she considers him a brother. Very odd thing since they've never met. This chapter here today that we'll be reading is the reason why she feels that way, and it's not going to be spoken out loud. There will be no words stating as such, but it's here. This is why she feels as she does. Let's see if you can pick up on it. See if my job as a writer to impart this info was accomplished. We'll find out. Let's get started. This is a bit of a longer chapter, not too bad, but it's a little bit long. Part 1, Chapter 19, An Unusual Errand. A rather thick envelope sat on his desk as he came into the office that morning. The envelope simply reading, Josephus, Aram had been at work in Admiral Derlith's office for 10 years. He had worked his way up after winning his essay writing contest in D, starting in the fleet's cavernous mailroom, a thankless job by any measure. He was liked well enough, and often praised for his uncluttered mind and his admirable work ethic. But his glasses and his ever-present sister problem kept him from advancing. Quite unfair. Most of the people who started in the mailroom at the same time he did were promoted years ago or kicked out for not passing muster. Eventually, he received a great promotion by default. Admiral Derlith of the Third Fleet, Lord of Cone, was in immediate need of a new adjutant, for his old one had quit in a froth. The post of assisting an admiral was normally a highly sought-after job, but this was the dreaded Admiral Derlith, and the paucity of applicants to join his office was notable. Admiral Derlith was a known crabhead, a hard, often humiliating man to work for, and not only was he a yeller and a screamer, there was something strange about him, something haunting and unsettling hanging over him that was palpable enough to be noticed by all. In any event, Josephus was game, and for lack of anyone else seeking the job, he was posted to the Admiral's office. Admiral Derlith, gray-haired, big-toothed, and indeed a difficult man to serve, was short-tempered, critically inclined, and fickle in his caprices. He often called him out and reproached Josephus in public in a brusque, loud manner, but Josephus endured, patiently serving the Admiral in a steady, competent manner. Despite his unflattering treatment of him, the Admiral was a kind benefactor, paying him rather well and personally seeing to his needs. His biggest problem was his glasses, and as the Admiral refused to allow him to wear them when guests were present in the office, he really couldn't see what he was doing half the time. The glasses were simply too ugly. Josephus, the envelope read. It was just a touch after 4 bells, and the office was quiet and dark on that hushed edge waiting for the day to begin. He set his armful of things down and opened the envelope. Inside was a rather thick letter from the Admiral. It read, Josephus, as you might well be aware, today is Tuesday. It is possible you might also be aware that on Tuesdays you are normally expected to retrieve my uniform from the bags, shine up the office tea set, and type my usual correspondence. Today, however, I have a novel set of errands for you to accomplish that supersedes all else. As follows shall be a detailed set of instructions. You are to follow the instructions to the letter. There will be no need for you to deviate from the instructions, question, or embellish them in any way. Follow your instructions to a point, complete your task, and tomorrow we shall resume our routine as usual. Overview. You shall retrieve 5 small parcels currently located in places listed hereafter. The parcels are small, each not weighing more than 5 pounds. You have been provided with a compartmented carrying satchel to accomplish this task. Please see below. Carrying contrivance. You have been provided with a custom carrying satchel that you will need to complete this errand. The satchel is located in the bottom drawer of my credenza. You will take note, the interior of the satchel is compartmented into 5 sections. Each section of the satchel currently contains a key. You shall need these keys to complete your errand. See below. The parcels you collect shall be placed into each compartmented section. I would appreciate you placing the parcels in order of acquisition in the satchel from left to right. Keys. As stated above, there are 5 keys contained in the satchel. The keys from left to right shall be situated in order of their required use, i.e., the first key on the left shall be the first key you will require. The key immediately to the right of that shall be the next one required, and so on. Parcels. As above, the parcels you shall collect are fairly small, will weigh no more than 5 pounds each, and will be packaged in a standard paper delivery wrapping. The contents of the parcels are rather delicate, and I will advise you not to handle them any more than is necessary to secure and place them into your carrying satchel. Once placed within the satchel, do not remove them from their compartments for any reason. Warning: do not mingle the parcels. Again, keep them in their separate compartments, and for creation's sake, do not open them. That goes without saying. Carrying weight. I do not anticipate your carrying weight to exceed 20 pounds. If you feel this weight is excessive, you may, under my authority, requisition a pull float from billeting for your use. Authorization code A11 Bravo 946621. Meal allowance. As this errand shall consume the better part of your morning and afternoon, I have set aside a money bag containing 50 fleet Solaris for your use, to be spent for breakfast and lunch at your discretion. Given the current rate of exchange, the money should be sufficient to purchase you a respectable breakfast and lunch. You may use all of the money left to you. However, if your costs exceed the sum of the money bag, you will have to pay the difference from your personal funds. I pray you use the money wisely. You shall find the money bag inside your custom carrying satchel. Detailed itinerary. 6 bells. A fleet coach shall be waiting for you at the Bilson Avenue dock. He will await you under the name Lord Errand. You will have until 6 bells and 1/4 to board the coach. Do not be late. Instructions to driver. You shall inform the driver to take you at all speed to the Grayson Memorial Land, Air, and Stellar Fleet Port at West Munson Street, Kingsway, Armenelos. 7 bells. You shall arrive at the port. Instruct the driver to wait and enter the west portico. Once inside, proceed to the locker yard and locate locker A1501. Using the first key in your satchel, open the locker, secure the parcel within, and place it within the open compartment. You will no longer need the first key and will discard it. Proceed now to the east portico of the port and locate locker W884. As before, use the next key in your satchel. Open the locker, secure the parcel, and place it in its compartment. Discard the key at that time. 9 bells. You shall then reboard your coach and head west to the incorporated hamlet of Mystery. Instructions to driver. You shall inform the driver to take you without delay to the Mystery Land and Airport located at 5234 Borgeland Way, Pitcairn, Mystery. 11 bells. You shall arrive at the port. Again, instruct the driver to wait inside. Proceed to the locker yard and locate locker 1155673. Using the third key from the left, open the locker, retrieve the parcel within, and place the parcel in its compartmented section. Discard the key. Once you have secured the parcel, your task is done at the Mystery Port. Your next destination shall be a great distance from Mystery. I recommend that you take the time to have breakfast. However, I advise you not to tarry past 12 bells. 12 bells. You shall then reboard your coach and head east to the city of Conwell. Instructions to driver. You shall inform the driver to transport you at speed to the gates of Esterland, Air, and Stellar Port, located at 77 Withelwell Road, Montforton, Conwell. 16 bells. You shall arrive at the port. Instruct the driver to wait. Inside, proceed to the locker yard and locate locker Blue 888. And use the key located in the compartmented section second from the right. Use the key. Secure the parcel and place it in its compartment and then discard the key. Once you have secured the parcel, your task is done at the gates of Esterland Port. 17 bells. You shall then reboard your coach and head southeast to the city of D. Instructions to driver. You shall inform the driver to take you to the city of D, land, air, and seaport located at 1622 Monmouth Seaquay, D. Once arrived, you will instruct the driver to carry on and return to the fleet. You shall receive additional instructions at the port as to your return arrangements back to the fleet complex. 19 bells. You shall arrive at the port. Dismiss the driver and proceed inside. Make your way to the private locker area and locate locker Bravo, November 77789 Alpha. Use the final key. Secure the parcel and place it in the compartmented section. Once secured, you will have successfully retrieved all required parcels. Final instructions. You shall receive a final set of instructions at the port. These instructions shall contain the address where you are to deliver the satchel and the details for your return arrangements to the fleet. I cannot accurately describe to you what you shall encounter in D. However, I pray you use your best judgment in that manner. I will thank you to accurately and safely follow these instructions and be returned to the fleet no later than 25 bells. I shall have no further need of your services for the remainder of the day, but will expect you to be at your desk promptly at 5 bells the following morning for work as usual. Signed, Derlith, Lord of Cone, Admiral of the Third Fleet. The letter was a typical Admiral Derlith creation, full of detail, leaving nothing to chance. He went into the Admiral's office dark and quiet in the early morning and pulled open the drawer to the credenza. Sitting inside was a black carrying case, rather on the largest size, with an ugly but functional set of handles. He pulled it out and set it on the Admiral's desk. It was a clamshell-style case, opening from the top like a carpet bag. Inside, as promised in the letter, were 5 neatly laid out compartments running the length of the bag, each section being about 2 inches wide. Lying within each compartment was a key. The keys were of a simple style, clearly keys that would fit into a lowly, disused locker at a public port. Also sitting inside was the money bag the Admiral had promised. The lining of the case was an odd, flexible latex covered with a gritty and unevenly sprayed-on layer of gray paint that had a very metallic quality to it. He closed the case, got his hat, and readied himself to leave the office. First, though, he watered the Admiral's plants and prepared the coffee set. All the Admiral would have to do when he got in was turn it on, and he would have his coffee. He then locked up and headed in the direction of the Bilson Avenue dock to await the coach. He expected a long day ahead of him. The hover coach sped across the Cana Avenue towards Conwell, a broad green highway cutting through the great Armentelos forest. There was no roadway or macadam or concrete making up the highway, only a winding, tough passage of compacted earth that hindered the growth of trees, where only short grasses could take hold. Lining the avenue were grand estates and fine xenon manners mixed into the dense, vine-filled tangle of the forest. Josephus had already collected 3 of the parcels. The whole exercise had gone just as the Admiral had laid out. He arrived at the ports and asked the driver to wait. Then he walked in, found the lockers, which was probably the most difficult part of the procedure, opened them, and got the parcel out. The parcels, again as advertised, were small, square packages of a soft nature. He thought he could hear sand or some other gritty material hissing about within the carefully wrapped paper. He slid them into their compartments. It could be said that Josephus, always a bright, big-headed fellow with a flighty imagination, often embellished his daily doings, transforming the mundane into the suspenseful and the extraordinary, imagining, as he watered the Admiral's plants, that he was tending to some infirm alien species, or that, when he fetched the Admiral's mail, he was retrieving some piece of covert intelligence crucial to the safety of the League. All sorts of rubbish like that. But today, he couldn't help but feel his fanciful embellishments were hitting a little too close to home. He was certain he was being followed. The feeling began rather early on, as he was searching for the lockers in Armenelos port. He had the quick notion that his footsteps were being retraced and his actions scrutinized from afar. He'd look back, checking over his shoulder, and of course, there were people there, moving randomly, going about their business, betraying nothing that would prompt him into believing that somebody was actively following him. So he tried to shrug the feeling off. When he got to the port in Mystery, the feeling returned. If anything, a bit more forcefully this time. He decided to sit down and have some breakfast, as there was a lovely cafe nearby that he was partial to. As he ate, he caught glimpses of something behind the usual traffic of people, just a hint of somber cloth, a brief silhouette that added up to nothing concrete. His imagination was on the verge of going on a full rampage. He hurried, finished his breakfast, and departed, getting on the coach and moving off eastward into the heart of the forest. As the lovely green highway floated past at a comforting speed, he began to relax, settle back, the partially full satchel sitting on the seat next to him. He thought to shut his eyes for a bit. As his eyelids closed, he saw something. He sat up and stared out the window. Standing at the side of the avenue was a tall figure wearing a gray cloak and a broad gray hat. The figure stood there before a stand of dense growth, holding its hands out in front of it in a rather threatening manner. The cloak and the hat that the figure was wearing obscured most of its body and made trying to determine its features or gender pointless. It looked to him like he imagined the Fiend of Calvert might appear. There were no clear descriptions of the Fiend, and even scholars and tradesmen seeking to profit from the Fiend lore varied wildly in their personal interpretations of how the Fiend should look. Some envisioned him as a scruffy, tattooed sailor, coming ashore for murder and mayhem, and then slipping safely back to sea. Others saw the Fiend as a proper gentleman from the Empire Hotel, dressed for a night on the town, wearing a gas mask, as the Fiend left no genetics behind for the evidencers to collect. Errand had always imagined the Fiend as a tall figure clad in gray, thin and agile, his clothes covering up most of his body except for his grinning mouth and teeth. And that, for the most part, was what he was seeing standing by the road. As the coach passed by, the figure stood there, motionless. Errand put his face to the window glass and gawked at it. It was simply a person standing by the roadside, but its intent seemed odd. Its presence felt malicious. As he passed, it glanced up ever so slightly. Its hat covered the upper portion of its face. He could see hints of a chin and a mouth pulled back into a mirthless grin. The figure fell into the distance in just a moment, and as the coach continued on its rapid way, straining to see, he thought he saw the figure step out onto the avenue green and watch as the coach moved east. He was relieved when he got to Conwell. He'd been fretting a bit over this gray figure standing on the side of the road. He bounced down out of the coach with his satchel, trying to convince himself he dreamed the whole thing. As he made his way to the port, he again had the feeling he was being followed. Turning, as he had before in Armenelos and Mystery, he looked back, expecting to see nothing. Across the street, standing in the sunshine, was a tall figure in gray, the same one he'd seen standing on the Cana Avenue in the forest, the bustling people moving around it as if it were invisible. But this was not possible. How could a person standing on the side of the road miles away in the great Armenelos forest travel so fast and get here ahead of him? He dismissed the idea as hogwash, chided himself for being foolish, and hurried inside. After he secured the parcel, feeling oddly invigorated, he decided to have lunch. He took his time and enjoyed his meal, sitting in a nice cafe in the center of Conwell. He was impressed by this lovely city and thought it truly a place he should return and explore in greater detail. With his nearly full satchel sitting next to him, he relaxed and even thought to order a spot of dessert. As he looked over the menu, his heart leapt into his throat. Sitting at the far end of the cafe was the now familiar figure in gray, closer this time, much closer, blaring eyes fixed on him in a side glance. Aram left the money bag on the table, grabbed the satchel, and fled back into the waiting coach. So far, with the exception of his phantom pursuer, the day had gone according to the Admiral's plan. He arrived in D, a Calvert city he was much more familiar with, and got out of the coach. As instructed in his letter, he dismissed the coach and watched it as it floated down the lane, joining the flow of traffic. Holding his satchel, which was getting a little heavy, and he actually wished he'd opted for that float lift, he marched up the steps towards the grand entrance to the port. A helmeted guildsman in a blue cloak and holding a Mason pulse rifle stopped him. "Afternoon, citizen," the guildsman said. "Good afternoon, sir," Josephus replied. "Do you have business in the port today?" "I do." "I'm afraid I cannot allow you entrance to the port." Why not?" "Your bag is reading as slightly radioactive." "It's not harmful. Please have no fear, but our regulations are clear. Your bag will have to be inspected and properly shielded." Aram looked at his satchel. "Radioactive?" "I'm not embarking on a trip. I simply need to go in and retrieve a bit of property that is stored there for me." "Well, that's fine. Please attend across the street." The guildsman pointed to a small building. "If you have a temporary business in the port, you may, at no cost, check your bag there and retrieve it once your business is concluded. A momentary inconvenience, I assure you, however, it must be done. Otherwise, I cannot allow you to enter." Aram thought a moment. "I'm from Calvert. I recall no such regulations." "It's new. There was an incident where a group of Zaffin scalawags attempted to blow up the city dock. The magistrate of D has enacted a standing order to visually inspect all bags prior to entering the port, until further notice. A bit of paranoia, perhaps, but there it is." He considered his options and looked across the street. His instructions were clear. Handle the parcels as briefly as possible. He opened his satchel and pulled out the final key. "You say my bag is radioactive, sir?" he asked. "Yes, not much, but it triggers my goggles here. You might be surprised how many mildly radioactive items are rolling around out there. I'm seeing things everywhere. Again, it's not harmful and it's just a formality until things blow over around here." He considered his situation. He assumed that the checking of his bags would add no more than a few minutes to his process. It shouldn't be a problem. He took the final key from his satchel, marched across the street, waited in queue for a few minutes, and checked his bag. He received a baggage ticket, and armed with his key and his letter and his ticket, he entered the port and waded into the locker area. After a bit of fruitless searching, for these lockers were not set up as orderly as they were in the other ports, again Calvert lagged a little behind everybody else, doing things not quite as well as is done elsewhere. Eventually, he came to the correct one and opened it. Inside was the usual square parcel wrapped in brown paper and an envelope. He opened it. To Josephus, Lord of Aram, you are to be congratulated. You have done well in executing this important assignment, and you shall be justly rewarded. Bring your satchel to 1144 Dunwoodwell, West Feklar, D, and go to apartment 212. There you will deposit the satchel, and you shall receive your reward and your ticket for your return journey to Armenelos. Signed, unsigned. He read the letter. It was vague and a little unsettling, clearly written in a hand other than the Admiral's. This was very irregular, to deliver a satchel to a civilian address when, for the whole time, he'd been operating under the notion that he was performing fleet business. And why was the letter unsigned? And why were there contents he had picked up radioactive, albeit slightly so? He bent down and picked up the parcel. Unlike the other parcels, this one didn't rattle. Instead, it had a clay-like, moldable quality. If he squeezed with his fingers, he could feel the contents changing shape slightly. He recalled the Admiral's warning not to handle the parcels too much. He tucked the parcel under his arm and headed back towards the street. It was best to finish up and get back home. He'd asked the Admiral in the morning what this was all about. As he neared the street to get his satchel, he heard someone clearing their throat. Standing a few feet away was a sister on the smallish side in her white robes and headdress. She was looking over her shoulder at him. She stood there for a while. Great sister, is there something I can do for you? He asked finally. She glanced down. There was a small puddle on the street in front of her, where she wanted to cross. He was a little dumbfounded. A sister who could probably boil away the puddle with TK or wish it away or do any number of miraculous things to make it vanish was content to wait for Josephus to do the chivalrous thing and lay his coat down for her. A lot of things passed through his mind. Ventinome, flawed, imperfect. He set the parcel aside and took off his fleet coat. He laid it out over the small puddle, and the sister lightly stepped over it. His coat barely got wet, the puddle was so small. She then looked back at him, lifted her hand, and touched his face. The white wrappings of her thin arm went up past the loose folds of her robes. Her small hand was so warm, she smiled at him, curtsied, and went on her way. Josephus took his coat and thought about what had just happened. Did that sister know he was Ventinome? Would she have cared? Holding his coat, he sat down by the curb and picked his parcel back up. He was filled with a sudden longing. He forgot about his task. Ventinome, flawed, imperfect, unwanted. Those words kept flashing through his mind. Her smile, her warm hand on his face. Those thoughts flashed too. Without realizing it, he was crying, holding the parcel to his chest. He didn't want to be Ventinome. He wanted the sisters to like him, to accept him. Everybody wanted that, and perhaps he wanted it a little bit more. He wanted to do great things and be a great man so that the sisters might look at him and be impressed, to look past the bad halibut and bad Brantball, to look past his lying brother and see him on his own merits. He was filled with ambition and desire to be something more than what he was, a flawed, imperfect Calvert. As he sat there, lost in thought, holding the parcel, he noticed it became strangely warm, and also became much more freely bendable than it had been. Creation, how long has he been sitting there, weeping like a schoolboy? Don't handle the parcels any more than is necessary. Thoughts of radioactivity entered his head. He got up and found a guildsman and had him scan the parcel for radiation. The guildsman looked at it and reported he saw nothing, no radiation, which was a big relief. He retrieved his satchel from across the street with his ticket and placed the warm parcel into its slot. His task was done, and he wanted to go home. "1144 Dunwoodwell West, The fairly happy streets of D gave way to a bit more fallen down area, hidden by a facade of a respectable street front. The interior was crowded with crooked buildings, strange smells, and unpainted termite-infested wood. Even being a Calvert man, Aram found himself a bit appalled. This area was a dreadful slum at its worst. Eventually, he found the correct address. The building was a tenement, an uneven 3 stories in height, the shape of an elongated L, and tiled half-heartedly in lime and white, with a fair amount of the tiles fallen and piled up around the base of the building. The whole structure of the building appeared rotten, ready to come down. Even the yard it sat in was barren of grass and strewn with unhealthy rocks and discarded refuse. He stood there for a moment and wondered if he truly wanted to go in. His instructions were clear, but it didn't seem safe, structurally or socially. Who knows what sorts were waiting inside? Desperate to get this over with, he opened the creaking door and went in. Inside was a seedy corridor lined with sullen doors of old, mirthless wood. The place reeked, not smell-wise or anything tangible like that. Rather, it had a terrible feel to it. He felt overwhelmed. Felt something pressing down, waiting to get at him. At the end of the corridor was a dusty stair leading up. Carefully, he made his way up the steps, groaning and teetering a little with each step. At the end of the corridor was his destination, 212. The oppressive feeling he had struggled with on the first floor was doubled here on the second. 212. It seemed an unhealthy, unholy place. Why, he didn't know. He felt for certain that whatever was waiting for him on the other side of the door was the end of his life, the last thing he would ever see. His death was on the other side of that door, and he was no match for his fear. He turned and fled, moving back down the steps in a clumsy racket, out the door and into the street, shuffling as fast as he could go until he spilled back into the more reputable sections of D. He purchased a ticket back to Armenelos out of his own coin and took a rumbling, slow pub trans across the forest. He didn't arrive back at Fleet until 28 bells, and he was exhausted after the long day. He brought the satchel and placed it in the Admiral's office. He'd apologize to him when he came in and say, in his judgment, he didn't believe the final drop-up point was safe. He decided to head back to his apartment and grab an hour or two of shut-eye. Moving slowly, he made his way down the sparsely populated complex. He wasn't overly surprised when the figure in gray came upon him. He expected it, rather. It seemed inevitable. He was certain the figure in gray had been waiting for him behind the door 212 in D. It hadn't been able to settle with him then, so it would do so now. It made perfect sense to him. It reached out and seized him by the arm. Errand was too bewildered to put up much of a fight. He was filled with a complacent, rather peaceful sort of utter terror, where he was a mere spectator on a hell ride into madness and death. He wouldn't be inconvenienced long. It would all be over soon. The figure dragged him into a nearby out-of-the-way place, a bathroom, and pulled him in. Inside, a small Marine was sitting cross-legged on the vanity top, tossing back a flask of something, boots removed and set aside, streaks of dirt running down the sides of her face. The Marine, a tiny black-haired girl, looked at them and blushed. You guys want to be alone, or something?" The figure in gray appeared startled and released him. He quickly stumbled away, reaching for the bathroom door that seemed an eternity away. He bolted out, followed shortly by the Marine girl. She also seemed quite scared. She hadn't even collected her boots. She ran out in her woolly socks. He went to security and reported the matter. They searched the complex, but found no mysterious figure in gray. He saw the Marine from the bathroom, a little intoxicated and on duty as well, bootless, getting berated by her superiors. Errand watched with a bit of discomfort as she was taken away to be disciplined. That little Marine probably had saved his life. Later, he sat down and explained what had happened to the Admiral. He thought the Admiral might be angry at him for not fulfilling his instructions to the letter. And he was angry. He was furious, in fact, but not at him. Speaking in his kindest voice, the Admiral thanked him again for fetching the parcels and for his vigilance, and told him he would be compensated for his pub transfer back to Armenelos. He also bade him not to worry about the figure in gray. The Admiral said he would take care of the situation, and that he was sorry he'd been inconvenienced. True to his word, Errand never saw the figure in gray at the fleet again, and what became of the satchel and the parcels he collected was out of his concern. And with that, we conclude Part 1, Chapter 19, An Unusual Errand. So a lot of things happened in that chapter. Lots of stuff. Errand's on a weird mission to collect these little parcels and give them to apparently a sinister figure, a murderous figure, a figure in gray. Along the way, he goes all around the countryside. If you look at a map of Cana, you can see it's quite a bit of distance. And he feels that he's being followed by a strange figure in gray. He sees it along the Cana Avenue in the Great Armenelos Forest. It's not a road, really. It's just a clearing of trees that has been like tamped down, so the ground is too hard for trees to grow. And he sees a figure in gray, and then he sees it again a few times, and then he sees it again at Fleet. And he was convinced that the slum tenement he was in, if he had gone into room 212, that figure would have been waiting for him inside, and that would have been it. Whether he is correct in that assumption, we'll find out. We'll see. And he sees the figure in gray again at the Fleet, and inside a bathroom where the figure drags him into, sitting there is Tara. I hope you picked up on the notion that was Tara. They had talked about that briefly in previous chapters, where Errand was, his life he believed was saved by a marine girl sitting in a bathroom drinking from a flask, and that was Tara, and there she was. He thought the Admiral might be mad at him for not fulfilling his task, but the Admiral, is a kind benefactor, even though he's a kind of a butt sometimes, tells him not to worry about it, compensates him, and he has no further contact with this figure in gray. So, as I mentioned, did you see why Lily loves Errand so much? Does it come together? Tell you what, after I peace out, if you really want to know, if you want me to tell you, I'll tell you after I peace out. Next week, we get back to the desperate situation in space with the Seeker getting attacked by the Head on the Hearth. Part 1, Chapter 20, Innocent Drury. So at last, we're going to tangle with Innocent Drury and find out just what the hell he is. We're going to find out next week. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out. Okay, so why does Lily love Errand so much, and what does it have to do with this chapter? Obviously, Errand was sent to pick up a number of items, possibly mystical in nature. Clearly, some of them are radioactive, and what is to be done with these components is not yet known. But one of them, the final one in D that he held on to after he encountered the sisters, because he had to check his bag and he was returning the parcel to the bag and got distracted by the sister. One of them is a substance known as rumbob, and rumbob is a form of shadow tech, and it's incredibly emotive. You can insert your feelings into it, whatever your feelings happy to be. If they're happy or sad or angry, you can put those feelings into the rumbob, but you can only do it once, and then the rumbob is gonna be stuck like that, and then you really have to just destroy it and start over again. In holding that parcel, when he helped the sister and she thanked him just with a glance and a touch on the cheek, all his feelings just sort of overwhelmed him for a moment, and he inserted his feelings, his determination, his ambition, his desire to be loved into the rumbob. All those things he imbued into this rumbob, and somehow or some way that ends up inside of Lily, and those feelings that he put into this mystical substance, this rumbob, are what helped pave the way for everything that follows. Helped Lily become a little bit more than just a sand nargle, a sand creation, a construct. Gave her more than just a bit of programming that the sisters put into her. It gave her a heart, gave her desire, gave her ambition, gave her tenacity, and all those sorts of things. And she got all that from Aram, and that is why she feels about him the way she does. Hope that makes sense. We'll see you next week, part 1, chapter 20, Innocent Drury. Once again, peace out.